There is someone in every group who people listen to. You have felt it your entire life. The person whose opinion shifts the room. The one others glance at before they decide. The one whose approval you want, even when you cannot explain why. That pull toward hierarchy, toward someone being in charge, is so automatic that most people never question it. They assume it has always been this way. A leader at the top. Everyone else below. But for the vast majority of human existence, that assumption would have gotten you killed. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors lived in small mobile bands of 20 to 50 people. And in those bands, the person who tried hardest to be in charge was almost always the most dangerous person in the group. Not the strongest. Not the most important. The most dangerous. The one most likely to be brought down by the collective will of everyone around them. Leadership, in the world your brain evolved inside, looked almost nothing like what you have been taught to recognize. So how did ancient humans actually decide who was in charge? The answer is one of the most surprising and counterintuitive stories in the entire field of human evolution. Let us start with what the evidence actually shows. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades compiling data from hundreds of documented forager societies around the world, publishing his findings in the landmark book Hierarchy in the Forest. What he found was that across virtually every documented hunter-gatherer group, something extraordinary was operating. Groups actively and deliberately prevented any single individual from accumulating power over the others. If someone began to dominate, to take more than their share, to make decisions unilaterally, to bully or intimidate, the group responded with a swift and sophisticated series of countermeasures. Boehm called this reverse dominance hierarchy. Instead of the most dominant individual rising to the top and ruling the rest, the group collectively rose up to push the dominant individual back down. This was not occasional. It was constant, systematic, and remarkably consistent across cultures with no contact with each other. The tools the group used were not primarily violent. They were social. It began with ridicule, making the would-be dominant person the subject of humor, of stories, of pointed jokes that everyone understood. If that did not work, it escalated to open criticism. The group talking directly and collectively about the behavior. Then came disobedience, simply ignoring the person's attempts to direct others. Then ostracism, the deliberate withdrawal of social warmth that in a world of 20 to 50 people was a form of social death. And in extreme cases, across multiple documented forager societies, the group could escalate to what researchers call lethal sanctioning, the collective decision that an individual had become too dangerous to tolerate. This is the world your leadership instincts evolved inside, not the world of kings and CEOs, the world of the campfire circle, where anyone who reached too hard for power found the hand of the entire group pressing them back down. But here is what is fascinating. Hunter-gatherer bands were not leaderless. They were not flat. Leadership existed. It was just a completely different kind of leadership than the one you inherit from civilization. Polly Wiessner, who spent 4 decades studying the hoansi San people of the Kalahari, documented in precise detail what leadership actually looked like in a functioning forager band. The people others listened to were not the strongest or the loudest. They were the ones with the deepest ecological knowledge, the broadest network of relationships across neighboring bands, the most reliable track record of good judgment, and critically, the most visible willingness to subordinate their own interests to the group's well-being. The moment a respected person began using their influence for personal advantage rather than collective benefit, their influence evaporated. The group simply stopped deferring. Wiessner describes this as influence without authority, the capacity to be heard without the power to command. And it operated through a mechanism that is both ancient and immediately recognizable to anyone who has ever been in a healthy community: reputation. Your reputation in a band of 50 people was not a social nicety. It was the only currency that mattered. It governed your access to food, to partnership, to coalition, to the help of others in moments of need. And reputation was built slowly, through thousands of small observable behaviors, and lost quickly, through a single, highly visible act of selfishness or cowardice or dishonesty. So let us reconstruct what a leadership moment actually looked like 50,000 years ago. The band needs to make a decision. Perhaps the water source near the current camp is running low. Perhaps there are signals that a predator has been moving through the territory at night. Perhaps two members of the group are in a conflict that is beginning to fracture the band's cohesion. There is no formal meeting, no vote, no authority to whom everyone defers by default. What happens instead is conversation. Extended, distributed, fluid conversation that takes place over hours around the evening fire, in small clusters during the day's work, in the way stories are told and questions are asked. And within that conversation, certain voices carry more weight than others. Not because those people have claimed authority, because the group has learned, over years of shared experience, that certain people's observations tend to be accurate, that certain people's suggestions tend to work out, that certain people can be trusted to put the group's need ahead of their own comfort when the situation demands it. Anthropologist Kim Sterelny, in his work on the evolution of human cognition and culture, describes this as the apprentice-learner model. Knowledge and judgment were not possessed by a single authority figure and handed down. They were distributed across the band and accumulated through a lifetime of observation, practice, and mentorship between experienced and younger members. Leadership was not a position. It was a quality that showed up in moments and then dissolved back into the collective when the moment passed. What made this system work was not just the negative mechanism of pushing dominant individuals down. It was also the positive mechanism of genuinely rewarding those who contributed most to the group's collective well-being. In the hoansi, and in dozens of other documented forager societies, individuals who were generous with food, who shared knowledge freely, who mediated conflict skillfully, who contributed without demanding recognition, accumulated a form of social capital that functioned as a kind of informal authority. Not the authority to command, but the authority to be heard. The authority that comes from having demonstrated over and over that you can be trusted with the group's survival. Archaeologist David Wengrow, in his collaborative work with anthropologist David Graeber, published as The Dawn of Everything, argues that the picture of prehistoric human society as uniformly egalitarian is probably too simple. The evidence from sites spanning tens of thousands of years suggests that different groups experimented with different social arrangements, seasonal hierarchies that dissolved after the hunting season, prestige systems that were deliberately kept from becoming permanent. What the evidence does not support, Wengrow argues, is the assumption that fixed, hereditary permanent hierarchy was inevitable or natural. It was a choice. And for most of human history, most groups chose differently. Here is the counterintuitive twist that almost everything about modern life obscures. The human brain did not evolve to follow a boss. It evolved to assess trustworthiness, to track reputation, to read the difference between someone who leads because they are genuinely serving the group and someone who leads because they are serving themselves. This distinction is not subtle in ancestral context. It is the difference between survival and death, and your brain is extraordinarily good at detecting it, even when your social conditioning tells you to ignore what you are noticing. Every time you have felt that quiet, visceral sense that a person in authority is performing competence rather than embodying it, you are running ancient software. Every time you have felt the pull to follow someone not because they have a title, but because they clearly know what they are doing and clearly care about the people around them, you are running the same software. The capacity to recognize genuine leadership, leadership that serves rather than extracts, is not a modern virtue. It is a 300,000-year-old survival skill. Now look at the groups you belong to today. The instincts you carry are calibrated for a world where leadership was earned daily, lost instantly, and never allowed to calcify into permanent hierarchy. The discomfort you feel when someone in power abuses it is not weakness. It is an alarm system older than civilization, telling you that something in the social structure around you has broken. Your ancestors knew how to respond to that alarm. The question is whether the groups you live inside today still give you the tools to do the same. There is someone in every group who people listen to. For 300,000 years, what made them worth listening to had nothing to do with their title. And somewhere underneath everything civilization has built on top of it, your brain still knows the difference.